there anyone here that needs an introduction to this topic, Light of the Bhagavat? Like has not attended any of the other classes and would like to know the context? We're all good. Okay. This is part 5 of 10. So I'm not going to finish while here. In this section, it's Prabhupada is going to be speaking about sociology, about higher and lower natures, and the process of elevating those with a lower nature to the higher nature. This is the duty of intelligent men, is to help bring people up. The scene in nature, rainy season. The wind carries the clouds to different parts of the globe, and the clouds distribute rains to the satisfaction of the people in general, just as rich kings and merchants distribute their accumulated wealth inspired by religious priests. Very nice. So there's the nature scene. There's the duty of elevated persons to the rest of society depiction, and the role of the priests, the sadhus that travel here and there and inspire people into proper conduct. So right away in the commentary, Prabhupada starts speaking about varnashram. The picture is showing in the upper left the Brahmana, and in the upper right the Kshatriya, that's Maharishi Parikshit chastising the personality of Kali. And the bottom right is the Vaishya, agriculture, and the lower left is the Shudra, the one who's assisting the other divisions of society. And while there's divisions of society, they all have one purpose, which is the theme of this conference that Prabhupada was writing the book for, the cultivation of the human spirit. So everyone, regardless of occupation, to know their spiritual identity, or he's equating self-realization with cultivation of the human spirit. As soon as cooperation between the four classes of men in society stops, and the basic principles of spiritual culture are neglected, the social structure of humanity becomes a second edition of animal life. Here's the second edition of animal life. Nice photograph. It is the duty of the intelligent men. So Srila Prabhupada is addressing the participants in this conference as the intelligent men, and attempting through this book, through his message, to help direct or illuminate what their duties are. The duty of the intelligent men is to influence the members of the richer communities, the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, to sacrifice for spiritual culture. Only in this way can the tension between the capitalists and the laborers be well mitigated. Now, this is a painting that's shown up several times already. There's a fellow sitting there on a luxurious chair. Earlier, Prabhupada called him the extravagant. And out in the field, there's the agriculture folks. And the extravagant is interested in somehow exploiting the energy and resources of the agriculturists so that his position of prestige and power and wealth, etc., is enhanced, and he's conspiring with his ministers. So the intelligent people are to direct such individuals, the wealthy, Kshatriyas or Vaishyas, to help promote spiritual culture. I mean, it's part of the Vedic system that charity is such an important part of Vedic culture. It's an essential. Well, I was visiting Houston once. I was asked to speak for 5 days on the duties of a householder, because there's a lot of householders. So I spent a fair amount of time researching what Prabhupada has written about the duties of a householder. And it was really clear. What the main duty, there are others, but the main duty is charity. So I spoke for 5 days about charity because it's so important. It's such a central part. Now, not all Kshatriyas and Vaishyas have the same wealth as another Kshatriya or another Vaishya. Generally, Kshatriyas do have some wealth, but there is a tension between capitalists and laborers. It's not a new one. So if those who are persons of means, they're interested not just in giving charity, but in elevating spiritual culture within society, that's the Vedic solution. Therefore, charity is recommended specifically to the cows and the brahmanas, or the Vaishnavas and the brahmanas, and cows, cow protection. This same text, but a different image. This is the image of Krishna's up top, giving direction to the three modes of nature, and the three modes of nature are like puppeteers, and the puppets on the one side, that's the capitalist, and the other side is the laborer. And both are controlled by the modes of nature, and the modes of nature are controlled by the Supreme Lord. So spiritual culture is to recognize who's the controller of all of us and everything, and to serve that supreme cause of all causes, who is the creator and the cause of everything. Again, emphasis on the duty of intelligent men. This is a scene from a temple that doesn't exist anymore, but it was a temple that was in Miami, a very nice project. So intelligent men are meant to give guidance and direction to the people in general. Brahmanas should simply guide the other orders in spiritual cultivation, just as, here comes the nature metaphor, just as the wind carries the clouds to other places to pour water. Nice example, isn't it? There's the wind carrying the clouds, and the clouds are carrying water to other places to pour the water down. So the Brahmanas serve like that. They study the scripture, they carry the knowledge of the scripture within them, and then they distribute that knowledge here and there and elsewhere. Very important element in society, that they do their duty as the Vedas indicate. The wind itself does not take up the responsibility of pouring water. Interesting, huh? The most intelligent men in society are the saints and sages who have sacrificed everything for the service of spiritual culture. Now, in the background is the Jaladuta. This book was written in 1962. This is before Prabhupada got on the Jaladuta. So he is writing and he's living the message that he's writing. That's the Acharya. There's not only precept, but there's example of that precept through practical activity. They travel to inspire members to engage themselves in acts of spiritual culture by sacrificing their words, money, intelligence, and life. Now, this phrase of sacrificing their words, money, intelligence, and life is drawn also from the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, when Krishna and Balaram are moving through the forest. Krishna points out to Balaram the trees. Again, it's a lesson from nature. But he puts his arm on Balaram's shoulder and says, just see these trees. They're worshiping you. Laden with fruits, they're bowing down and offering their obeisances unto you. And he goes on describing that they're the emblem of a good citizen. The good citizen engages kriya, vacha, diya. So they engage their body, which is their life, their words, their intelligence, and their wealth. Same. An elevated person engages all these things in service. The service is the purpose of promoting spiritual culture within society in general, under the guidance of the Brahmanas. A society with no taste for spiritual culture is a blazing fire, and everyone in that fire perpetually suffers the threefold miseries. So they're the firefighters, the firemen, the Brahmanas. Clouds pour water to extinguish a blazing fire in a forest. Similarly, intelligent men, like clouds, pour water on the blazing fire of miseries by disseminating spiritual knowledge. Prabhupada had a very clear idea as he was doing what he was doing, traveling, going here, going there, speaking here, speaking there, publishing literature, disseminating knowledge in various ways. Using this metaphor, he's very clear what he was doing, putting out the blazing fire of material existence by that dissemination of knowledge. And that's exactly what happened. At least for those who received the downpour from the cloud-like visits and messages that he would distribute, the burning of material existence diminished, and such persons started to flourish, like the effects of rain in a parched patch of land. Very nice. Here's a little model of the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. Temples are also meant to impart spiritual education to people in general. Spiritual ceremonies are held for inspiration and not for exploitation. If there are flaws now because of the age of Kali, they should be rectified, but the institutions must be saved. Now, having been recently to Vrindavan, I can relate to this spiritual ceremonies are held for inspiration, not for exploitation. I mean, a very vivid, as I'm speaking this, a very vivid image in my mind is one of the places we went along the side of Govardhan Hill. There's a little temple on the eastern side of Govardhan Hill, and it's called Doka Dauji. Doka means to see, and Dauji means Balaram. Dauji means elder brother. Dauji, Doka Dauji. And up on the raised part of Govardhan Hill, that little temple where one evening Balaram was on top of Govardhan Hill and he was looking in the southerly direction, and much to his amazement, he was observing a rasa dance that Krishna was performing with the gopis, because there's a number of places where rasa dance was characteristically performed. One of them is at the southern tip of Govardhan Hill. So he saw, and he was so amazed at what he saw that he nearly fell off the hill, and the crown that was on his head fell off his head and fell onto a Govardhan Shila below and made an imprint on the Govardhan Shila. So that imprint is called Mukut Shila, because his crown hit the Shila and made an impression of a crown. So Mukut Shila. So we were walking along Govardhan, again going in the southerly direction on the eastern side of Govardhan Hill, and I was gesturing and pointing out to the devotees what that little shrine or little temple on top of the hill was, because we don't walk on the hill. And there were 5 Brahmins who were it started enthusiastic and then it started to get aggressive, where they didn't speak much English, but they did speak 2 words, Brahmana Seva, with their hand out. And they were all like, they're really eager to get some money. For what? To show us what was already being explained, the Mukut Shila and the temple, and apparently, they make their livelihood. These pilgrims go doing parikrama around Govardhan Hill to get them to come over to see the Mukut Shila and give some money to them for showing them the Mukut Shila. So, spiritual ceremonies are held for inspiration, not for exploitation. If there are flaws now because of the age of Kali, they should be rectified, but the institutions must be saved. And that can be said about anything. For example, Prabhupada was aware that as he was going forward establishing temples here and there all around the world, the persons who were involved in establishing those temples were persons who previously were not necessarily in Shuddha Sattva or in pure goodness. They're persons who he had lifted up by his association, and there are still residual tendencies that weren't so elevated, and that would cause some conflict amongst the participants, the members of the organization, and so forth. He had to deal with residual effects of impurity. So here's a statement. But this is 1962. It was even before there was an organization, but he knew there would be discrepancies. So if there are flaws now, because of the age of Kali, they should be rectified. But the institutions must be saved. So very nice. Very nice. It's a key phrase to help us understand going forward in time also. We're less than perfect, and we're having an expectation that others should be perfect. But others are not always perfect. And when we see discrepancies between perfect and not so perfect, sometimes the mind can be disturbed. All right, if there's some flaws, let the flaws be rectified, but the institution must go forward. So that's chapter 21. This is part 5. Here's chapter 22. The focus of chapter 22 is going to something that was from the very first verse out of all of this. And again, it's Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But focus has been going to scenes of nature during the rainy season. Now the focus is going to shift just slightly, and it's going to go what happens as the rainy season winds down. And it starts to become the autumn season. So here's the verse. After the complete rainy season, the forest of Vrindavan was full of fruits like dates and blackberries, ripening on the trees and bushes. Lord Sri Krishna, along with his elder brother Sri Baladev and other cowherd boys of the vicinity, entered the beautiful forest, accompanied by cows, to display transcendental pastimes with his eternal friends. So the painting you see at the bottom, this is one of the paintings that the artists from mainland China painted for the first publication of this book. There's Krishna, there's Balaram, and there's the cowherd boys, and they're enjoying their activities together. Next comes a whole series of nice, more modern paintings of Krishna and cows. I just happened to like these paintings, so I included them. Interesting painting, isn't it? Krishna loved the cows. Lord Krishna appeared with his personal entourage once in 4.32 billion years. Now I want to read directly the commentary that Prabhupada writes for this verse. It's 3 paragraphs. Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appears with his personal entourage once in paraphernalia, just to attract the conditioned souls of the material world. Although the material world is only a shadow of the spiritual world, the materially encaged living entities seek spiritual happiness here in a form perverted by materialistic attachment. Empiric philosophers with a poor fund of knowledge imagine a spiritual picture that is impersonal. But the spiritual living being, less attracted by the impersonal form of spiritual emancipation, becomes more attracted by the material form and becomes hopeless of spiritual emancipation. Paragraph. Therefore, the absolute personality of Godhead, out of his limitless and causeless mercy, descends from the spiritual kingdom and displays his personal pastimes at Vrindavan, the replica of the Krishna Loka planet in the spiritual sky. Vrindavan is the most sacred place within this cosmic universe, and people seeking to achieve spiritual emancipation by entering the kingdom of God may make a home at Vrindavan and become serious students of the six Goswamis, who were instructed by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The six Goswamis were headed by Srila Rupa Goswami, who was followed by Srila Sanatana, Srila Bhatta Raghunath, Srila Jiva, Srila Gopal Bhatta, and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. They were all seriously engaged in research and excavation of the mystery of Vrindavan Dham. Now, this is to a group of people in Japan. What do they know about Vrindavan Dham? But he's introducing them. Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appeared at Vrindavan about 5,000 years ago, and the relics of his appearance at Vrindavan were lost from view. But Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the very same Lord Sri Krishna in the form of a great devotee, appeared at Navadvipa district in West Bengal and excavated the holy places of Lord Sri Krishna's transcendental pastimes. He instructed the above-mentioned six Goswamis to compose authorized literature on the cult of Vrindavan, and any serious student anxious to know about the Supreme Lord may take advantage of this invaluable literature and the guidance of authorized scholars, and thus know about the Lord of Vrindavan, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. Look what he's doing, Prabhupada. He's presenting, of course, it's the light of the Bhagavad, and certainly the Bhagavad has to do with Bhagavan. And the original form of Bhagavan is Krishna, so he's introducing Krishna to these people, the educated, elevated persons attending this conference. Krishna descends and displays his personal pastimes in Vrindavan. Some painting of the six Goswamis. In the background you see the Madan Mohan temple. He's advising, become followers of these six Goswamis and reside in Vrindavan. Now that little short message, unpack it a little bit, and this is the message of Raga Bhakti. What's Raga Bhakti? Raga Bhakti is the mature stage of spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is called sadhana, and the mature stage is when one becomes cleansed from spiritual practice, and the tendency to be engaged in service arises spontaneously from the heart. That's Raga Marg. In this Raga Marg, specifically, the teaching of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is given by Rupa Goswami to reside in Vrindavan, given by Raghunath Das Goswami to reside in Vrindavan. And the commentary says, if you can't reside in Vrindavan, then mentally reside in Vrindavan. Means, think of Vrindavan, wherever you're in, wherever you live in the world. You think of Krishna in his activities and form and pastimes and exchanges of loving dealings with his devotees in Vrindavan. And how do you do that? By hearing. And as mentioned in this commentary, by reading the writings of these 6 Goswamis, because they're revealing life in Vrindavan, Krishna in Vrindavan, in various ways with great detail. So Lord Chaitanya empowered them to give this message, which is the message of Braja Prem. The message of Braja Prem is spontaneous devotion to Krishna. So I'm expanding this very succinct message, but the succinct message in this little book is giving Raga Bhakti to the reader. Chapter 23. So Krishna has come out with the cowherd boys at the end of the rainy season, and he, Krishna, is the center of all affection. Here's one of the paintings that the artist in mainland China made for this first publication. There's Krishna and cows. The cows that followed the Lord within the forest moved slowly because of their heavy, milk-laden udders. But when the Lord called them by their specific names, they at once became alert, and they hastened toward him. Their milk bags overflowed and poured milk on the ground because of affection for the Lord. Nice depiction by words. Then there's paintings that help us get that picture even more clear. The cows are affectionate towards the Lord, and the Lord is affectionate towards the cows. And in the spiritual Krishna Loka, there's thousands of cows. It is said Nanda Maharaj had how many thousand cows? 900,000 cows. When we were in Vrindavan, one of the days we went to visit Vrindavan town. And to get to Vrindavan town, the first place we went to was Kaliagat. To get to Kaliagat, we had to walk through the Goshal. So ISKCON Vrindavan has a Goshal. And they have 400 cows and 150 bulls. That's a lot of cows. I asked them, how many cows do they milk? They said they have a policy that during one season it's 10 cows, and another season it's another 10 cows, so a total of 20 cows. So that leaves 380 cows that are just munching grass. So it's cow protection. And they have, not like ample grazing area, but they certainly take good care of feeding the cows. They're not hungry. And part of the reason is now they stopped, but they were accepting stray cows. Now there's 2 or 3 projects in Vrindavan that I'm aware of. One was started by a godbrother named Kurmarupa. No, you don't know Kurmarupa, but I know Kurmarupa. We served together many, many years in New York. And he then went to Vrindavan and became a Gurukul teacher. And after he had some health difficulties, he left the Gurukul and started with some registered organization with the government for taking cows that are neglected on the street and taking care of them. The entity is called Care for Cows. I know some devotees that found out about this, so they sponsored the cow. And when they went to Vrindavan for the yatra, they went to see the cow that they are sponsored, because it was a cow, or there was a cow, two cows, that had previously just been one of those cows wandering around in the street, eating garbage, because they got to eat something. So the cows were, but Kurmarupa, once he had sponsors, took them off the street and have a large grazing area where they take care of cows. I don't know what the number is, but there's another Rupa Raghunath that does has a Food for Life program, and he does, that's part of what he does. He does many different things. Has a school, anyway, nice activities in Vrindavan. So taking care of cows is a nice activity. And Krishna had 900,000 cows, or Nanda Maharaj, and Krishna looked after them. And when Krishna would call them by name, their ears would perk up, their tail would stick up in the air, and they start waddling their way towards Krishna, because they're stimulating their natural affection for him. Just as the cows and all the inhabitants of Vraja have a natural affection for Krishna, similarly, our natural affection for Krishna can be fully revived by a little culture. And that little culture is naturally revived by the Brahmanas that have love for Krishna. So that's the system. We simply have to receive the message of the Lord from a proper source with a purified heart. And the process of Sankirtan naturally helps bring about that purification. Spiritual culture is meant to revive the natural affection of living beings for the Lord. Now, this is what Brahmanas do, and persons who are Brahmanas are guiding society to help achieve this outcome. Here's a whole paragraph in the commentary, and that's the end of this verse. For spiritual realization, one has to purify the heart and know things in their true perspective. So a heart that's pure and proper knowledge, a good combination. As soon as one does this, the flow of one's natural affection begins to glide toward the Lord. And with the progress of this flow, one becomes more and more self-realized in various relations with the Lord. The Lord is the center of all affection for all living beings, who are all his parts and parcels. When the flow of natural affection for the Lord is clogged by desires to imitate his lordship, one is said to be in Maya, or illusion. Maya has no substantial existence, but as long as its hallucinations go on, their reactions are felt. Very nice depiction. The Lord, by his causeless mercy, displays the reality of life so that our hallucinations may be completely dissipated. So the scene is, the rainy season is over. Krishna and Balaram come with the cows and the cowherd boys and engage in their activities. And then Prabhupada is explaining that the Lord descends once in a day of Brahma, and through various representatives, the six Goswamis, etc., he has descriptions made of his activities. And these descriptions help to stimulate our natural, forgotten relationship with Krishna. And the nature of Bhagavan, he's the source of all energies. Now we're back in the scene of nature. There you see Krishna seated by the side of a river, probably the river Jamuna. When the Lord entered the forest of Vrindavan, all the inhabitants of the forest, both animate and inanimate, were eager to receive him. Now, how do you get something inanimate having a feeling like eagerness to receive him? The answer is, although rocks and other entities that are, in the material sense, are inanimate, in the spiritual realm, everything is person. For example, here's two for examples. One, for example, is during the Kartik month, throughout ISKCON, many of you also, I'm sure, had some observance for the month of Damodar, offering a lamp to Damodar and singing Damodarastakam, etc. Our acharyas describe that, for example, the milk that was on the stove, when Mother Jasoda saw the milk that was on the stove starting to boil over, she left Krishna to go rescue the milk, because the milk was for making some nice preparations for Krishna, so she can come back and feed Krishna when she had finished taking care of the milk that was on the stove. But Jiva Goswami describes the milk being in service to Krishna was in a state of desperation. What's the use of my life? Mother Jasoda can give unlimited happiness to Krishna from the milk from her breast, and she can just continue going on feeding. And what's the service for me? What's the use of my life? Let me just jump into the fire. Or another nice example is the chapter, I think it's chapter 33, maybe it's 34, just after the Rasa Leela section with the gopis. The gopis observe, having passed time with Krishna with rasa dance, the next day Krishna is going to go herding the cows. So that the chapter opens with Krishna playing upon his flute as he's entering into the forest, alerting the forest denizens, here I come. So that's like the opening verse. And then all the rest of the chapter is two verses together, and how that sound of Krishna's flute is impacting the different entities within the forest of Vrindavan. There's the trees, there's the monkeys, there's the birds. So those are animate, and they're enlivened like anything. Here comes Krishna, and we can hear his flute. But then there's also the water, and the rocks, and the sky, and the clouds in the sky start rumbling. Here comes Krishna. The understanding I'm pointing out is right within the Bhagavatam and our commentaries. In the spiritual conception of thing, everything ultimately is a person. Just as God is not imperson, he's person. So also that which comes from God is also a person. And those persons have their potencies, so one may become more aware of the potency, but behind the potency there's a person. Everything in Vrindavan, in the spiritual dimension of Vrindavan, not the one that we see with our eyes, but the spiritual dimension of Vrindavan, everything ultimately is person, just as Krishna is ultimately a person. So Krishna saw that the flowers of the forest all fully blossoming. This is after the rainy season, were weeping in ecstasy, honey flowing down their petals. The waterfalls on the hilly rocks were gladly flowing. They're not just flowing, but they're with some emotion, gladly flowing. And one could hear sweet sounds from the caves nearby. So that's the scene, the nature scene, and then Prabhupada's commentary. Spiritual consciousness of every species of life can occupy its proper place. That proper place is in relation to Krishna, as displayed by the land, water, hills, trees, fruits, and flowers of Vrindavan. So here's a nice painting with Krishna in the forest of Vrindavan. Flowers, waterfalls, birds, trees, fruits, hills, caves, beasts, and human beings are all Krishna's energy. So when Krishna enters the forest, they're really enlivened. The Lord has multifarious energies, and therefore the Lord and his energies are identical. Now he's going to go into the distinction between material and spiritual energy. A nice painting showing a body moving through space, but the earth, water, fire, air, and sky, the 5 gross material elements, and then mind, intelligence, and false ego. That's the intention of this painting, is to illustrate the 8 Bina Prakritir Ashtada, 8 separated energies of Krishna that comprise the material. But then within the material there's spiritual, there's the spiritual spark. And along with the spiritual spark, or the soul, is the Paramatma, Atma and Paramatma. And the source of all of them is the original personality of Godhead, Krishna. So both matter and spiritual energy are from Krishna, and therefore Krishna is called Kaivalya. What's the meaning of Kaivalya? Anyone knows? Kaivalya? The absolute oneness of all things. Oneness. The identity, the oneness of all things with the source. So there's the energy, spiritual and material, and there's the source. So is there any separation between the energy and the source of the energy? They're connected. There is that aspect or dimension of oneness. However, the energetic is not the energy. The energy is not the energetic. The ray of sun is not the sun, although the ray of sun is inseparable from the sun. There's a oneness and there's a distinction feature. I mean, Prabhupada is doing this just within the context of the scene in nature. Spiritual energy is superior because without its contact, material energy cannot produce anything. The touch of spirit makes matter move and makes matter transform, and the transformations of matter produce whatever it produces. It may produce, for example, flowers and fruits, or a tree, or something. And it doesn't produce it on its own. Matter, material nature, doesn't produce anything on its own. It's by the touch of spirit, then it can move and produce things. Here's an illustration to show cold water and hot water. With the help of electricity, we can turn water into cold or hot. And here's the explanation at the end of chapter 24. There are different stages of spiritual development in matter. In the material world, the spiritual sparks of the personality of Godhead are covered by the material energy in different proportions, and gradually they become spiritualized in various species of life. The human form of life represents the complete development of the senses for spiritual realization of one's original affection for the Lord. Therefore, if, despite this opportunity for human life, we are unable to revive our natural affection for the Lord, we must know that we are wasting our time, our life, for nothing. By the grace of the Lord, however, the spiritual consciousness of every species of life can occupy its proper place, and these species can express their spiritual affection for the Lord in the Shanta Rasa. Shanta Rasa is neutrality. So neutrality, for example, the land, water, hills, trees, fruits, and flowers of Vrindavan. They're not doing any active service, but they're in Shanta Rasa because they have this kaivalya, or relationship of oneness. And with that, some kind of affection. So that when Krishna enters the forest and plays upon his flute, they start to feel ecstasy. I mean, the Bhagavatam describes the waves of the lakes and rivers. They start to raise their arms in receiving the Lord. It's really nice. And the rocks start to melt. An ecstasy and anticipation that Krishna is coming. There's loving feelings, in other words. Here's the final chapter. As the phrase Kaivalya was used here, is now becoming one with the Lord, but Prabhupada is going to qualify the Vaishnava sense of becoming one with the Lord. So here's the artist from mainland China, her nice painting about Krishna. Notice above, there's the rain coming down. There's some dark clouds and there's some rain pouring down. But the boys are beneath the base of a tree. They're having their lunch and they're being protected by the tree, the shade of the tree. Krishna reciprocated with the feelings of the inhabitants of Vrindavan. Where there was rainfall, when there was rainfall, that's in this painting, Krishna took shelter, there it is twice, at the feet of the trees or in the caves. There's many nice paintings depicting this. And together with the cowherd boys, they would play. That's what boys will do. And sometimes the cowherd boys would sit with Krishna, and Krishna would play upon his flute. Sometimes they'd have their meal, and the boys would enjoy taking their meals together with Krishna. Sometimes they'd play various games. Here's one boy massaging Krishna's shoulder. Notice the other boy is sneaking his hand over on Krishna's plate and stealing something from Krishna's plate. Someone is making a joke. They're doing different things, all in pleasurable mood to play with Krishna and satisfy Krishna. This is the oneness in loving exchange with Krishna. Becoming one with God does not always indicate that a living being merges into the existence of the Lord. To become one with God means to attain one's original spiritual quality. Unless one attains one's spiritual quality, one cannot enter into the kingdom of God. He uses the example of the ocean. Sometimes impersonalists, they have this phrase, the idea of merging, like, a drop of water merging with the ocean becomes the ocean. Oops, what happened? Simultaneously one and different, not merging. This is Prabhupada's explaining to these participants, because he's going to Japan. At least the plan was to go to Japan. And in Japan, the sense of theism, or God as a person, is less common than the conception of impersonalism, the conception of Buddhism. So he's going to address this. In Vrindavan, this is the last slide. All spiritual entities, the cowherd boys, cow maids, the forest, the trees, the hills, the water, the fruits, the cows, and all others enjoy life spiritually in association with the Lord, Sri Krishna. They are simultaneously one with and different from the Lord, but ultimately they are all one in different varieties. So it's, again, this oneness and difference. There's varieties, and so there's differences. But there's oneness because they're all extensions of the energy of Krishna. And this is a very nice teaching to end with for this evening. I mean, I don't know what your experience has been from hearing all of these depictions of nature and lessons for mankind from scenes of nature. But I find it masterful that Prabhupada has at least a sense of understanding his audience. And from understanding his audience, he is helping them understand lessons of life through scenes of nature. His use of words, his poetic expression, it's all very beautiful. Oh, you have a copy of the book? Where'd you get it? Okay, interesting. I just got message today. Here's a little background for those of you that didn't hear. This book was written in 1962, but it never was published in 1962. It was still existing in a manuscript form in a trunk. At some point in time, the trunk was opened because there are many writings that Srila Prabhupada had never published, had just written, that were in this trunk. Many, many interesting things. And the manuscript was given to Tamal Krishna because the purpose, the audience was the Far East, so he was establishing ISKCON's presence in China, so he had it published in Hong Kong. That's where I mentioned this, where these different paintings are of a Chinese flavor. And so it was printed 23 years after the book was written. So add 23 to 1962, then you know when the book was published. But they didn't do reruns. It was published, and then it was out of print. Time passed, and I got an inspiration to revive it. So I asked them, do you have copies in the warehouse? No. Can you reprint it? Then the answer I got was, well, we now have policy for the China BBT that says there was like a big commotion about different words in English and the best way to translate them into Chinese. And they got into some dispute over, no, you shouldn't say it that way, you should say it this way in Chinese. So they ended up with a policy. So I was told, first of all, we have to find the manuscript. And then second of all, we have to make sure that it matches our BBT policy with how English words then become translated into Chinese. Because maybe they weren't doing that when it was first translated into Chinese. So they found out they couldn't find the manuscript of the Chinese version that Tamal Krishna Maharaj had published. That was a problem. Then finally, they found somebody that had a copy in their library of the original Hong Kong 1985 version in their library. And then they had to convert that published version into a digital version. So that took some time, but then somebody knew how to do that one. And then once they had it in the digital version, then the editor had to go through and make sure that it matched the, their policy. This English word is translated into Chinese in this way. And there's some key words that were really sensitive. Like one of them that was really sensitive is consciousness. There are different schools of thinkers that says it should be this or should be that or something else. Because they're not a precise word matching consciousness in Chinese. Interesting, isn't it? So the devotee was very helpful to Sota Kumar, and he got it all ready for printing. And then the Communist Party every 5 years, they have a big festival. And they re-elect their, the fellow and, make policies. And so it was decided that the government started doing its thorough clamping down on everything, especially during this Communist Party, festival. So they stopped all BBT printing for a month. That month is over, so I wrote to the BBT, what's the plan? I said, good news, we're going to print 1,000 copies in Chinese. So now they wanted to know what's my plan once those 1,000 copies are. So I'm just starting to make a plan of how to present all of this to the Chinese audience and have the book so they can read the book and then hear the explanation of what's in the book. And the masterfulness of Prabhupada addressing their culture, meaning their culture, it's not the only thing that's within their culture, but their culture of appreciating lessons of life through nature. And I'm, in the course of just in sharing, in the course of all of this, I'm finding out there's many, very many similarities between Chinese culture and Vedic culture. I mean, it's no surprise because it was once one culture. But vestiges of Vedic culture is embedded in, very ancient Chinese culture. Many, many things. Many, many things. I mentioned a couple of them in previous classes. Some of you know something about, does any of the young girls, have you been trained, anyone has been trained in Bharatanatyam dancing? You know any girls that have doing Bharatanatyam dancing? Yes? So what's the history of Bharatanatyam dancing? What's the Muni? Huh? Bharat Muni. It's Bhatri Muni, right? Bhatri Muni. So Bhatri Muni wrote extensively about the science of rasa and how rasa can be depicted and stimulated through the medium of dance. Now, I know somebody that did their whole Bharatanatyam dancing, and they learned from their teacher who knew Bhatramuni's teachings, what his teachings were about the science of rasa. You might be interested to know that Rupa Goswami, much of what he writes in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is drawn from Bhatramuni's writings. However, by Rupa Goswami's empowerment of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he expanded the number of rasas from what Bhatramuni gave. I forget the number, I forget the detail, but it was just more detail from what Bhatramuni said, but the framework was Bhatramuni's work. So there's a nice devotee, Chinese devotee, now living in America, that did some research on this topic, and their ancient personalities in Chinese culture that write something very similar to Bhatramuni's writings. It's in Chinese, it's not in Sanskrit. It doesn't bear the name of Bhatramuni, but a very similar understanding of the science of relationships and the science of rasa. I'm just sharing that with you for the purpose of, this just came to my attention 2 weeks ago. It's another, for me, it's another example of the similarity, the homily between Chinese culture and Vedic culture. It's a really good fit. Now, the government has gone way over there, but they don't at all encourage, it's just the opposite. But they can't suppress it because it's there. It's part of their culture. And with rasa, the basis of rasa is the Supreme Person. They can't just like stamp him out. They can try. They're trying. But it's part of the culture of the people. So Kali Yuga is advancing in many ways, yet at the same time, when there's, the point is this, when there's the touch of a spiritual personality, like Prabhupada, or those that are become familiar with Prabhupada's teaching, which is nothing other than Krishna's teaching through disciplic succession, then the awakening of spiritual culture will flow. And when spiritual culture awakens and flows, then the darkness of the age of Kali is dissipated. And thus the title, Light of the Bhagavat. And that's what Prabhupada understood his mission was on behalf of Bhaktisiddhanta, and that means on behalf of Lord Chaitanya and disciplic succession, to disseminate the light of the Bhagavat and bring spiritual culture to the foreground and the darkness of the age of Kali being dissipated by the light of the Bhagavat. And he was just a bearer of that light, going all around the world, sacrificing his energy, sacrificing his life for that mission, and doing it differently, according to different audiences, very effectively. The world is going to be perpetually indebted to what Srila Prabhupada did. Unlike any other, even predecessor acharyas, that were certainly powerful like anything, but the method by which Prabhupada disseminated the light of the Bhagavat was masterful and with permanent effect, indelible effect in this dark age of Kali. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So let's see if there's any thoughts on this or discussion.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
The last portion that was explained, Maharaj, where we said related to the original spiritual quality that a person cannot enter, and with the I couldn't get it completely, but when you mentioned that it's related to Buddhism, where they, I think, per my understanding, they believe that the Lord is a jyoti. Is they?
That's not what their belief is. They don't have any conception of a Lord.
Oh, okay. Oh, they don't. Okay.
There's no conception at all. I mean, their conception is a little surprising for our sensibilities, but their conception is, in the ultimate reality, all there is nothingness.
That is called shunya. Empty.
Yeah. Yes, shunya, zippo. There's nothing. We think that there's something, but there isn't something. And suffering is because of thinking that there's something. And having desires because you think there's something to be enjoyed, and therefore there's suffering. So, but the reality is there isn't something. It's a little, it's tricky. Now how you're supposed to get there. You just knocked it out, so. You can put questions up, that's okay. But you don't need this. So now, you want to go on with your question?
So Maharaj, how should we understand that?
Speak into the microphone, because.
Oh yeah, sorry. How should we understand this original spiritual quality that if a person, if it cannot go back to its original spiritual quality, then they would not be one with Krishna?
Well, I'm not sure what your question is. Because it seems that you've understood what Prabhupada was writing a little differently than I understood it. My understanding what Prabhupada was expressing is, in order to become reinstated in our eternal identity and spiritual identity, the sense of that connection between ourselves and the source has to become unobstructed. Right now it's obstructed by misconceptions and the sense of separateness. So there's been two verses where he's speaking of the kaivalya, the sense of identity between all things and the source of all things. And as one awakens to that reality, especially the soul being in quality one with the source of everything, then as that self-realization becomes matured, then one becomes more eligible to enter into the spiritual reality, the spiritual realm. So it takes knowledge and realization to get to that stage of, again, being connected to that which we're part of, the realization of that connection. And that becomes from realized souls imparting knowledge of the Vedas by their words and by their actions. And that's the uplifting of society that he's been speaking about. So now with that picture, you want to rephrase your question because I'm not sure what you're asking.
I think I got my answer, Maharaj.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. My question is, in one of the slides you mentioned about like if we are not physically present in Vrindavan, the mind should be present in Vrindavan.
What I spoke was a writing of Jiva Goswami commenting on Raga Bhakti.
Okay.
So let me just do it. Let me say the whole thing, and then you ask your question again. In Rupa Goswami's writings in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he describes sadhana bhakti and spontaneous raga-nuga bhakti. And that raga-nuga bhakti is spontaneous. In the very first verse in Rupa Goswami's writings where he introduces raga bhakti, the very first thing he says is one should reside in Vrindavan. This is the kind of spontaneous devotion that Lord Chaitanya gave is Braja Bhakti, which is spontaneous. It's not regulative, it's spontaneous. And he says, Rupa Goswami writes, that for this one should reside in Vrindavan. Jiva Goswami in his commentaries says one should reside in Vrindavan, however that may not be possible, and therefore at least mentally one should reside in Vrindavan. So I was describing how do you mentally reside in Vrindavan if you don't physically reside in Vrindavan. And it has a lot to do with hearing the messages of Krishna, Bhagavad Gita, or hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, its message from the right source. And by hearing and hearing and hearing and hearing and hearing, that relationship that we have with Krishna becomes awakened, and you carry that within you. And that way it becomes spontaneous, or raga bhakti. So if you can't reside, what I said was, this is commentary, if you cannot reside in Vrindavan, then mentally you reside in Vrindavan. So you carry that within you. It's an internal cultivation, resting upon Shravanam Kirtanam. That was the explanation. And how do we get that? From the six Goswamis, because they give it. So our connection with the six Goswamis, empowered by Lord Chaitanya to write those books that they wrote, it helps us on the spontaneous devotion platform. But we access that first of all through sadhana. Now, in the very first verse, describing sadhana bhakti, it's an important verse. It's like a dictionary definition of what sadhana bhakti is. It's where there's the aspiration, the sadhya, the goal, the attainment of bhava. To say it negatively, without that aspiration to attain bhava, it's not sadhana. We'll say it positively. Sadhana means there's a goal, a sadhya, the objective to be attained by the sadhana is to attain bhava, loving. Then the explanation is given, not just emotion, but its activities in relation to Krishna's pleasure. So when there's activities of sadhana for the purpose of giving Krishna pleasure, and with that comes some emotion, which is also another meaning of the word bhava, a feeling, but it's the activity as well. And it's within, it's a nice explanation. I just spent some time today going over it, like half an hour. So, Now back to your question. Now, would that explanation help address your
Yeah,
question?
my question was related to that. You very well explained that, like what one should be doing to attain that mindfulness presence in Vrindavan, and you already
Okay.
explained that one. Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, here's a microphone.
So, Guru Maharaj, my curiosity was like always we see that in different pastimes. I could be missing something as well, but as much as I recall that in different pastimes we see that the transcendental knowledge flows when there is like ignorance or darkness or negative emotions, like in the morning also we were discussing. So why it is like that? Because
White is like what?
why does transcendental knowledge needs to be coming when there is darkness? Why it
I don't understand your question.
so
Within every living entity is love of God.
yeah.
There's a sense of who we are, and there's a sense of who the Supreme is, and there's a relationship between us and the Supreme that's innate within the living entity. However, that becomes covered. And, the coverings are many ways of describing the covering, but a blanket term is Maya, accepting illusion to be reality and accepting reality to be illusion. That's Maya. So we're covered.
Right.
Now, your question?
So I understood, Maharaj. So my just a little follow up is that in like Vrindavan, the devotees of Krishna or Sakhas or Gopas, they don't know Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead, so they don't require that, right?
They don't require that.
That's why there is no transcendental knowledge, right? Or
That's not true.
means they have knowledge, but the dissemination of knowledge or it's not required there.
Well, the dissemination of knowledge is not required because it's already there.
Right.
They're at the supermost matured stage of transcendental knowledge,
Yeah.
which is sadhya, the goal. They're there. They don't need sadhana because they're there.
Right. Yeah. So it was just a curiosity, Maharaj, because even in Dhruva Maharaj's pastimes, we heard that when he had some negative emotions, then transcendental knowledge was coming to him. But transcendental
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
knowledge
whoa, whoa,
doesn't.
whoa, 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 whoa. Slow down. He got mercy from his mother. He got mercy from Narada. That was the byproduct of the mercy from his mother.
Yeah.
And from the mercy of Narada, he got a sadhana. And he was very, very determined to get what he wanted, what he wanted from Vishnu. However, that strong desire was dissipated by the mercy of Narada, by which he got the mercy of Vishnu. So he got Vishnu, but the desire was gone.
Right.
Now the transcendental knowledge. He didn't study scripture.
Right.
He didn't go to school. He didn't study Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. He just followed what Narada said, with faith in Narada. Now, the transcendental knowledge, in other words, there's different ways of awakening transcendental knowledge. One is the study method, and usually that is the recommended method. However, he went down a different track, and that transcendental knowledge was awakened within him. And when the conch of Lord Vishnu touched his head, look at his prayers. Knowledge was awakened from within him. and he could speak wonderful teachings. So now, rephrase your question.
So, like in case of Parikshit Maharaj, also we saw that when he came into anger and frustration, he put that snake around that rishi, and that became the reason again for like transcendence or mercy. So where I'm feeling little stuck is like why there should be a negative reason always to
And the negative reason is because we're conditioned. It doesn't have to be. Negative condition arises because of our coverings. And we're averse to the suffering that's induced by the fact that we're covered. It's always like that because we're covered.
Yeah.
You know, it circles back to the starting point. The Brijbasis, they don't need sadhana. They don't have a need there because they're already there.
Right. Yeah. So I was also wondering, there are no examples in this material world where the mercy or transcendental knowledge came without any negative, means starting point of negative.
Don't just hover on that space.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Let's take Shukadev Goswami
Yeah.
as an example. The impetus for his awakening was not some negative emotion or negative experience.
Right. Yeah.
However, he was naturally attracted to the Srimad Bhagavatam and his message, and when he heard Srimad Bhagavatam verses, he returned back to the ashram of his father and received the full instruction in Srimad Bhagavatam from his father.
Right.
Sat at the feet of his father like the other students, and he heard Srimad Bhagavatam thoroughly.
Yes, Guru Maharaj. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think we're done. Yes? You had something? No? There's something online? Okay, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. First question is from Vamsi Krishna Prabhu. He says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, since Varnashram is broken or Brahmanas fail to influence rich men, should they expand their duties to become rich for charitable purposes or focus more on bhakti?
No, it's not. The question itself is a little jumbled. The Brahmana's duty is not to become a non-Brahmana and become the rich person because they can't influence the rich persons. The duty of the Brahmana is to be a Brahmana. And being a Brahmana doesn't mean necessarily, being a Brahmana doesn't mean that one is a devotee. A devotee has Brahminical quality, whatever their occupation may be. But, so be careful with the language when you ask a question like this. Let the terms that you're using in your speech should be, reasonably well defined. So no, the answer is the Brahmana should be a Brahmana, and if it's not being affective or effective to awaken the consciousness of wealthy persons, then become more qualified, not switch horses and become something that you're not. Next.
Next question is from Manini Radha Mataji. She says, thank you, Guru Maharaj. I found that although I know the goal theoretically, is the enthusiasm in moving toward the goal is not stable. Is it okay? Is it out of lack of faith?
Well, that's one way of assessing the cause. There's another way of saying, to assess the cause, and that's to say, when there is a big pile of anarthas in the heart, then unsteadiness is the factor, or is the display. It's not so. One can say the cause is a weakness of faith. Another way of saying is it's the contaminations of heart are so substantial. It's the cause. That's the cause of the unsteadiness. So let's just say, supposing someone has lots of faith, but they're still unsteady. So if they have lots of faith and they continue practice with faith that this will take away the contamination. Now, to scripturally support what I just said, there's a nice verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Lord Chaitanya gives a definition of faith. Shraddha Shabde Vishvas Kahe Sudridha Nishchaya. So the meaning is, faith is confidence that by one thing, Krishna Bhakti Sarva Karma Kritahaya, by one thing, all other desirable things can be fulfilled. Like, if I have $1 million, then my $10 and $100 problems are solved. So get $1 million. Or some other thing. There's a big feast, and if I eat sufficiently, my hunger will be gone. Just this one thing, and the other things are taken care of. So the definition of faith is, by one thing, I have confidence that by one thing, many desirable things can be fulfilled. I don't have to go chasing after the many desirable things. I just have to have clarity. What's the one thing that will help me achieve all the other desirable things? That's faith. That's the definition of faith. Now, back to her question. The question is my unsteadiness due to insufficient faith? It's one way of saying yes. And there are other ways of saying the cause of that unsteadiness is too many contaminations of heart. So while I'm scrubbing my heart, I find there's more and more contamination. And more contamination. And more, it's just, I feel overwhelmed. When am I going to get to the heart that doesn't have so much contamination? So it's the contaminations of heart, or the anarthas within the heart. That's the cause of unsteadiness. There's other ways of describing also. The desire to be a separate enjoyer from Krishna. That's the cause of our unsteadiness. So that's another way of saying, yeah, that's weak faith. Or another way of saying is, we don't have sufficient knowledge to know what is that one thing. If I can achieve this one thing, then all other desirable things are fulfilled. Supposing I don't know. Supposing I don't have knowledge. Most people don't have knowledge. And so they're unsteady. So knowledge doesn't mean just information. Knowledge means direction in life. And when I act with proper direction in life, then the cleansing, the realizations will come, cleansing will come, then I can start to understand better and become more steady rather than unsteady. So different ways of answering. One way is, yes, it's a weakness of faith. But there are other ways that are equally correct. Is that it? Online. Okay. Srila Prabhupada.